Today we have the honor and pleasure to speak with Kevin Bertram of Fort Circle Games, who will share his thoughts on game design, game publishing, and the industry in general here on Legendary Tactics. So I want to welcome Kevin Bertram of Fort Circle Games here today, joining us. Thank you so much for taking some time. And I'd been bugging you to meet up for this interview because I really want to know about Fort Circle Games and the history and your history with gaming. You kind of hit the scene with Shores of Tripoli, and you've got a whole bunch of games coming that people are definitely going to be interested in. And so tell me about the story of you and the company.
Sure. I've always been a gamer. From even when I was 5 and 6, I was playing Risk and Feudal. And so I've always been kind of near the game industry. And it helps when one of your good friends is the designer of Twilight Struggle, you naturally tend to play some interesting games.
Yes.
Um,
How did you connect with Jason Matthews?
he worked on the Hill, and we just kind of were in similar orbits. And because we had a lot of overlap, we both, are interested in games. We both debated in college at the same time, in high school at the same time. We're about the same age, and so just kindred spirit, I suppose you might say.
Nice. Okay.
So when I designed the Shores of Tripoli, well, I should take a step back. I actually had no intention of becoming a game designer, but I started reading about the First Barbary War, and I was like, this is a fantastic story. There's got to be a great game on this. And I went looking, there was no game on it. And so I designed a game, and I knew I wanted to use a card-driven format to be able to tell the history pretty well. And I started looking for a publisher, and there just wasn't. I didn't find a publisher that was kind of right for me, that would give the game the care and attention that it would need, right? Like some companies would want to make it with counters, but I really wanted to have wood pieces. So I decided to publish it myself. And as I went through that process, I realized I'm probably better publisher than I am a designer.
Really?
And so I want to have Fort Circle be a spot where people have designs that they think are special, and they want, real care and attention paid to them. And I think we saw that with the Votes for Women, which
Yes.
Tori Brown was actually a debate partner of mine some many years ago in college, and I was a little bit older than her too. And so like that partnership worked out really well in that we took the time to craft what I think is an excellent game. I think that the marketplace has certainly said that it has valued it pretty highly. And so that's sort of what I'm trying to do, is have a publishing company that is not publishing 50 games a year, right? We're not just spitting them out quickly, but that we really try to put a lot of care and attention to the games. And so, I'm sure we'll talk about the lineup coming out here shortly. And so
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
really excited about that.
Yeah. And so, because I really enjoy Shores of Tripoli, I think it's just it just strikes that right balance between the playability side and the historicity, and it's just a really neat game in that it kind of follows a similar arc, or a lot of games follow a similar arc, by design, obviously, to reflect the history, but it feels fresh every time. It always feels like, I don't know, it was a very well designed game. You should consider designing another one day.
Well, I have a couple designs in the
Okay.
hopper for myself, and I don't mean to say, I love the Shores of Tripoli, and uh, you know, I when you design a game, you can certainly err on the side of it being more of a sandbox and wider open, or you can err on the side of being sticking to the history, but yet still giving players agency. And that was certainly, the side I erred on. And some people prefer that, some people don't, and that's fine. But I thought that, with it being an attractive looking game and very easy to teach, I've taught 10-year-olds that game with no problem at all. Um, that it just kind of it finds a right spot in the market. And so we've actually just about sold out of it, where I have, I think, 10 games in my basement, and that's it. So
Wow.
we're going to do a reprint later this year, and maybe add a couple little spicy new things just just to make it even a little bit better. So
Yeah. Well, I remember speaking with Jason Matthews, and he says it's quite a moment when you release it into the wild after playtesting it endlessly, and you just hope it all hangs together because you got you got your playtest group, but they may not catch everything. But overall, I think it does well. I don't think there's been any major balance issues or anything that people have mentioned.
no, we've been really happy with it. So
Yeah. Now, what was it like moving from kind of that designer mindset to publisher mindset?
well, I have a background in business, so like the publisher role was a little bit easier for me, right? What are our costs of production? How do we market it? What do we need to, how do we make sure the company is at least profitable enough to make another game? And, kind of following that process. And so that was fairly easy for me. I would say the design side is far tougher for me. Editing rules is very difficult. Um, I edited, I wrote and edited most of the rules, both for Triple E and for Votes for Women, taking obviously what Tori wanted the rules to be. And you know, every time someone says the rules aren't clear, it just wounds me. But because that's just the thing I hate doing the most, and I really struggle with it. So uh the business side is easy. Like I like accounting. I think accounting is fun, which I suppose marks me as a little bit of an odd duck. So so the publishing side I find very exciting and enjoyable. And that's definitely I think where my heart lies. So
Yeah. It is kind of a niche thing in many ways. How do you find the community? Has the community been very supportive? Do you find them hard to reach? Do you find it easy to reach? What are your thoughts?
I found it was interesting with Shores of Tripoli because I did a couple of things that were um like I was very aggressive about finding playtesters, right? And you saw the playtest list. I mean, if you've purchased the game, you've seen the number of playtesters, and those folks, not all of them, but a number of them sort of became ambassadors for us, or they would evangelize on our behalf. And so when it came time for the Kickstarter, a lot of those people were already sort of on board with what we were doing. And they have friends, and right, they all have their play groups and their social groups. And so that was very helpful. We were also very liberal with sending out review copies. I mean, I think we sent out 300 or 400 by the time it was done. I'd have to go back and take an accurate count to be sure. But my thought was the cost it takes for me to send a game to a reviewer, if that sells just one more game, then we're already ahead.
Yeah.
And if it sells it to and someone who buys that game is someone who says, like, I like this game, now I'm going to buy their next game and their next game, well, then that's fantastic. So we were very, and a few people didn't like the game, but we sent pretty widely our games out to reviewers, and I think that's something the historical games publishers haven't been doing. I think GMT is starting to come around to realizing how valuable that is, and I think Worthington is starting to do that as well. So I think folks are starting to see that if you have a well-designed, interesting historical game, that there is a market for it outside of this kind of little narrow set of war gamers. Because I look at a game like Dune Imperium or Twilight Twilight Struggle also, but Terraforming Mars is what I meant to say. I look at games like that, and those are very, they're not super complex, but they're somewhat complex, and they're not historical, but they're a narrative that is similar to when you're telling a historical story. So I think that we shouldn't be afraid to, reach out to a wider market and talk about historical games. I know you had attended our Circle DC this year. Last year, we had someone from Washingtonian Magazine, which is our local magazine, and someone from NPR come, and that was great press, and that's reaching out to obviously a more mainstream audience than used to read Avalon Hill's general magazine. But
Yes.
I think it's good for the hobby, and I think it's definitely good for us as a company.
Yeah. And so Fort Circle, do you have a commitment to historical gaming only, or is there a philosophy that drives Fort Circle in that way? Or
It's it's the niche that I feel comfortable with. It's I mean, I love history. It's what I studied as an undergrad, but also, there are a lot of game companies out there, and I find a lot of the topics for some of these games are very just like grafted on and not very like I think there's sort of going to be a reckoning coming in that broader market. And I don't know how to stand out in that broader market. But in the historical game market, I think, with our commitment to quality and uh, historical accuracy, the historical documents that we include in games, I think that we have been able to, create a very clear brand voice that people recognize. I've heard a number of people, I've seen people say on Twitter, like, oh, they're going to do that, the Fort Circle way. And that does mean something.
yeah,
It means that it's not going to be an ugly game, and it's not going to be a game that treats the history um, in a slipshod manner. Like, we're going to do the history right, and hopefully the gameplay is good too.
yeah. And how do you bring that aesthetic? Like it almost like I know so far there's only been two games published, but there's a through line. You can see the aesthetic is definitely there. And is that something that you did yourself? Did you work with others on that, or was it how
Well,
did that come
obviously,
together?
I am no graphic designer, let me assure you. Um, and in fact, on the shores of Tripoli, there were probably all told maybe 12 different graphic designers and or artists that I at least did a little work with while I was trying to find folks that I really liked. And so Mark Rodrigue, who we both know, um, is definitely my map specialist, but does a lot more than that now. Like, but he's definitely he did both maps. He's also did the map has done the map for Hunt for Blackbeard. He's done the map for Halls of Montezuma, two games that are coming out this year. He's working on some of the other games that we're working on, and so there's certainly like a style of a look that we like, that we try to follow through on. Obviously, some games, they're different eras, they're going to look a little bit different. We don't want them to be carbon copies, but definitely a very high standard. On Votes for Women, Bridget Delicato worked with us, and she was just fantastic. Like, I think everything about that design really is just sharp. I love the graphics in that, and it means that you're spending money to make sure it looks good, and we think it's worth it to make sure the game looks good. So
Yeah, 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 and it's I mean you see I think there's in many ways in the industry there's this drive towards more and more plastic things and more elaborate pieces and so forth. But I think you can strike a balance between all that crazy Kickstarter stretch goal stuff and just having a nice looking game on the table. Um,
yeah, and we've rejected that stretch goal, fear of missing out kind of marketing, and maybe that isn't 100% wise from a marketing standpoint. I don't actually care. Like, our brand is that we are going to put the very best game we can together, and we are going to sell it to you, and that this is the game. I don't I really dislike that, like, there's add-ons that might change the flavor of the game or the nature of the game, or I don't know, it just doesn't appeal to me to do that. I'm not a huge fan of it in the Kickstarters that I back. Obviously,
mhm.
I've backed some Kickstarters that have done that, but yeah, I think our preference is just, we're going to put a lot of wood in the game. We're going to put a lot of good looking cards in the game, and a thick mounted map, and a thick box that you could probably use as body armor, and that game's going to last, and it's something that you're going to be proud to have on your shelf.
Yeah. Oh no, I have both games on my shelf so far, and they look great. So so right now, just where do you see the board game industry right now as a whole, and where it's going, and also how does historical gaming fit in? the current zeitgeist and where things are kind of headed?
Well, I think that so during the pandemic, there was obviously a huge increase in board gaming. That was natural. People were at home. I think there was a little bit of an increase in solo gaming. And so there were, the hobby was definitely, or the industry was at a really kind of a high point during the pandemic and coming out of it. I think we're seeing a little bit of a shakeout in the broader game industry. We're seeing, a couple companies go out of business or they're ratcheting back a little bit. I don't actually think the same thing is happening with the historical games because with historical games, there's been a base of users, and as the topics that historical games look at widens, I think that there's becoming a more diverse customer base for historical games. And so while the mainstream or broad or whatever we want to call it, broad hobby market kind of peaked and then is coming down a little bit, I don't think that hobby games had quite the jump. But on the flip side, I think therefore our industry is still going to continue to increase because not only is that people are starting to recognize the opportunity for both education and entertainment of historical games, but I also think that there are companies that are recognize that and doing great things. I think, if you look at GMT's output in the last 5 years compared to what it was 15 years ago, I think you'll notice a market change, and I think it's really improving. Not that it was ever bad. I'm just saying you're seeing their offerings getting better and better. I think companies like Worthington have really been improving what they've been producing. A company like Capstone, which published Weimar and Watergate, and who they're more of a mainstream company. But I think you're starting to see companies recognize the value of historical games, seeing there is a market there. It's not going to be as big of a market as something with unicorns and dragons, but it's still a market there. And so I actually feel really good about our corner of the industry, even if I think the industry as a whole might, drop 5 or 10% over the next couple of years.
Okay. And for the games, like when you choose game topics or you choose, because you get, I'm sure you get offers and ideas and so forth all the time.
One or two.
Um, yeah. Are you picking them because they're different, or are you like, is there ever that kind of temptation to uh, choose a game that will maybe sell well because it's just it's a popular topic versus something that's maybe a bit more diverse and interesting? Do you ever have that? Is it ever a balance that way, or how do you strike that?
Yes, I think so. So I looked at a game on D-Day that was actually even a kind of a unique take on D-Day. I liked it quite a bit. I'm looking forward to owning it when it comes out. But I was like, there's 250 games about D-Day, and what is this game really saying that those games haven't said, even if some of the mechanics were kind of innovative. And I wasn't 100% sold on how historical it was. And so, even though I think that would have been a great seller for us, I passed on it. And great designer, really liked the designer, but it just wasn't quite, didn't fit what, and I admit this is sort of, I'm going on my own intuition and, the small group of folks around me whose opinions I really trust. And I decided to pass on that one. And then on the flip side, a game like Night Witches, which is designed by David Thompson and Liz Davidson. Ian O'Toole is doing the art. So it's the pedigree on the game is amazing. I think some people might have been surprised that we took that game. It's not about the United States.
Mhm.
It's a little bit more modern. But what I liked about it is it was looking at, you know, these women pilots who not only were competent, but were excellent. And I that story grabbed me, whereas another retelling of D-Day didn't. Is that the right decision from a business standpoint? I don't know, but why did I publish one and not the other? It's just the other one. I think that story is more interesting and hasn't been told. Now,
Yes.
I have to be careful that I want to make sure that the stories aren't too esoteric and or out there. I want to make sure like there's an audience for every game we publish, but I feel like we've done a pretty good job so far. And as we talk when we talk about our upcoming lineup, I think that'll probably become clear.
Is that decision made easier by your choice to publish less because you really have to pick the best of the best, or does it make it harder?
Um, I mean, it makes it so I always want to say yes to everything, right? Because I'm like, oh, that looks neat or that looks neat. But then I have to be like, all right, if we're going to publish four, at most 5 games a year, like where does this fit into that lineup and how much sense does it make? And so, um, that becomes a little tougher. And so it's a good tool for me, or it's good enforcement on me to make sure I'm picking the things that I really think will not only sell well, but that we can do a good job of. And like we're going to be publishing a game a little later on the peace treaty conference of between Russia and Japan and the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. Now, it does have some very relevance to the United States. It's why Teddy Roosevelt got his Nobel Peace Prize. Um, it's a pretty esoteric topic, but it's actually fascinating. And I mean, we have lots of war games and we have very few peace games. I know a couple have just come out this recently, Versailles, um, or Treaty of Versailles, and a couple others. But I don't know. I thought this was a unique take on a unique topic that sounds exciting, and the history is fascinating. And like, I think this sounds so silly, but like I'm a sucker for menus from hotels in like the late 18 and early 1900s. And of course, like one of the things we're going to include with that game is going to be one of the menus from one of the diplomatic dinners. And I just like, I don't know, that just sounds really cool. That's part of history that I find fascinating. And so yeah, so I guess it's really just however I feel that day, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so great that there's this scope now that I think designers feel that they don't just have to do the Eastern Front, World War II. They can dive into these, fascinating historical situations and topics and put a game out on something that, may not have, ever caught fire, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It would have been viewed as, off the beaten track or weird, but now people are open to that, I think. And in fact, I think arguably people are even beginning to seek it out a little bit, you know.
Yeah, I think we've certainly found that to be the case with Votes for Women. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, I use the word war game very broadly, like businesses war game out new product launches and, health departments war game out, disease. Like, so I think of that term very broadly. And, a political campaign is you can war game that out too. And so I'm really kind of happy. I mean, there have been a handful of grumbles, but I'm really happy that most people recognize that, yeah, we can take these tools that have been traditionally only applied to battles and apply these mechanisms and these notions into different types of conflicts. And I think that's been great. That's certainly the spot that we've been very excited to kind of sit in. And so, yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. And you have quite the slate of games coming out. So Hall, you mentioned a couple of them. So how about tell me what you're excited about with each one. So what do you really fired up about with each of
Sure.
these?
So let me just start sequentially. So,
Sure.
Halls of Montezuma is at the printer. We've actually had to do a little bit longer because we're making the box thicker because we have too much stuff and it won't fit in the current box size.
Don't
So
want the box to fall apart.
yeah, throwing us off a little bit there. But what I really like about that is so that's a co-design between me and my good friend Gilberto Lopez, and it is the Mexican American War, and it takes that same 27 card uh, uh, format that you've seen in Shores of Tripoli, but then we layered on a political event, like phase, I guess you would call it, where the United States player is actually playing as the Polk administration. So not only are you prosecuting the war, but you have to deal with Congress. So to get more troops, to get the treaty with Britain done, to sign the eventual treaty that we signed to end the war with Mexico, which most people don't know, but only passed by one vote. And so historically, and so there's that all the things you really are doing prosecuting that war effort. On the flip side, the Mexican player also has access to the anti-war movement in the United States. So, Abraham Lincoln and his spot resolutions, and Frederick Douglass and the Transcendentalists, and all kind of the folks, the remnants of the Whig Party. Well, that so they were all sort of opposed at points to the war, primarily over the expansion of slavery. And so, but then at the same time, the political situation in Mexico is extremely fraught. There were 8 or 9, depending on how you want to count, different presidents during the Mexican-American War. And so, having to manage that political process while fighting an entire war for a continent, I just love the way those interplay. And so I'm very pleased about that game. Boko Runke has designed a game called Hunt for Blackbeard, which is outstanding. It plays very quick, like 20 to 30 to 40 minutes. And, it's a pleasure to get to work with Volko. He's outstanding. And that's another game where we have to make a thicker box or a deeper box because there's too much stuff we're putting into it. But, and it's a cat and mouse game. So one person is Blackbeard. And not only do you need to avoid the hunters, but you also have to do your pirating things. And the hunters, of course, are trying to stop you from that and hopefully capture you. And so that I'm very excited about that. We have a game that won't go on Kickstarter, or at least won't before we publish it. We partnered with the Shakespeare Folger Library, which is here in Washington, D.C., and they actually have the largest collection of first folios of Shakespeare's collected plays. And so we designed something for in the venue when you go to the museum, which is reopening in June. But then we've also designed a game about where your rival printers trying to put together the first folio. And that's actually a co-design with my wife, and I'm very pleased with how that turned out. Then make sure I don't miss anything.
Yeah.
Then First Monday in October comes right after that, and that's designed by Talia Rosen. Jason Matthews is the developer on that. And that it'll probably be our longest game that we publish. It's more about a 2-hour game, which is sort of at the edge of the length of game we want to publish. But every minute of that game is exciting. I mean, it is outstanding. It's the history of the Supreme Court. So you're seeing all these major cases come down the pike. You're trying to put your preferred justices because their philosophies on the court. There's a lot of it's a winner. I think that game is going to be just ridiculously popular. And then we have Night Witches, which is, of course, by David Thompson and Liz Davidson. That is about the Soviet women biplane pilots who fought during World War II. That, of course, I think just by the pedigree of that, I understand why people would be very excited about it. And then the last game for this year that probably won't be published till next year, but I hope we kickstart this year, is Peace 1905, which is it was the winner of the Consim Game Jam, a 4-person team headed up by Maurice Suckling, who's designed a number of games, and we're pretty pleased about that. And then that's like what's the schedule. But in the following year, we have 2 games. Alex Knight we have a game from Dan Bullock. We have a game from Jason Matthews. The long-awaited Guano game will be released hopefully next year. So, and I'd be happy to rave about that game, but maybe I should save that for the next time we chat. And so, sure. These are, it's a weird collection of topics. I admit it's hard to find a running theme. I mean, some are war games, and some are definitely more economic games, but they're all rooted in history. I would say probably the Shakespeare game is maybe the least tied to history, but still it's fairly well tied to the history. And so I'm just super pleased with all these games.
Yeah. Well, it's fun to watch your face, and you're like a little kid. Just you can't wait to get these out to show people. You can just see, and that's the passion that you need to have to do to run a board game publisher, and all the hard work and long hours. And
Nobody does this to get rich.
No, no, exactly. No, it's for the love of the game, right? And it's and then
Absolutely.
I think again, I think that there's an appetite for unusual topics, interesting topics. People don't want to play out D-Day and the Eastern Front and all that stuff anymore. It's but that opens up some fun avenues, which I think you're taking advantage of. I got to try this Supreme Court game. Never thought I'd be excited about a game about the U.S. Supreme Court, but there
Oh,
you go.
it's great. It's too bad you didn't get a chance to try it at Circle DC because I heard the games were very spicy. So I'm trying to think about how to make the convention as welcoming as possible. But if you're interested in historical games and you can be around DC sometime in early April next year, please come join us because I think that I think we have a good little soiree that we put on down here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks so much for taking some time to chat with us, and I'm hoping this is the first of many conversations. And but I'm glad you got to share more about Fort Circle and what you guys do. I think it's a great. There's so you Fort Circle has a very bright future in our industry,
Well, that's
and
very kind of you to say. I hope you're right.
yes. And well, if not, there's if nothing else, it's going to bring a wide range of topics to historical gaming, and that's and you put on one heck of a convention. So
Thank you.
yeah. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us.